So I'd like to call to order the what's today, the January 11th Light Board meeting. And first order of business is meetings and minutes. Pam, how are you? You're still muted. Do we have any minutes to review? I didn't see any recent emails.
No, I think last night or yesterday I got something from Karen giving me the next set of minutes. So I will be looking at those and sending them out as soon as I can get to them.
Okay.
But I don't know where we are. I think these would be November, which means we're still, quite behind. And if we accelerate our meeting schedule, we're going to get even more behind, I fear.
Yeah. Okay. The next meeting that we have is going to be on January 25th. And we're going to be doing 2 meetings a month for the next few months. All the exact dates are listed on the agenda. And Dave, would you like to move into your update and we'll go from there?
Sure. So you guys received the director's update. I'm just going to go through it. I do have something new that's not in there that came in yesterday, but I'll start with gravel pit solar. It's gravel pit solar 3 with the Shaw Renewables. They've come to us looking for a price increase for a number of different reasons. Based on what we have seen, National Grid and Eversource, who were part of the project, as well as a number of MLPs, National Grid and Eversource doesn't look like they're going to negotiate to increase the price on the contract. They did come to us in June for a price increase, which was minor, and we did do that. We're under contract with them. The main issue is, if we decide to accept the price increase, when's the next one going to come, and so on and so forth. So it's really made us question working with the Shaw Renewables. And we're talking about a 20% increase per megawatt hour. And to me, it's unacceptable. They haven't done their homework. And, we have other contracts that they did do their homework. So, we have to make a decision whether to accept the price increase and amend the PPA or reject it. In the past, with stuff of this significance, we have not accepted it and we've terminated. I will note that the state has stepped in and said that they cannot do this. They need to honor their contract, which, is pretty interesting. So we're gonna have to figure out our final decision, but we'll be working with Kerry and we'll make a decision on that pretty soon. So it's unfortunate. Since we're on the wind topic, you're all familiar with the Rocks Wind project, which is we're under contract. It's been operational. Got some bad news yesterday. On December 23rd, there's 4 turbines. Turbine number 2 experienced a serious fault. And so the owner notified GE Renewables to come out and take a look. On the 28th of December, they found visual cracks in the gearbox, and when they looked through the port, they could see metal in there floating around in the oil, which obviously is not good. On December 31st, they conducted visual inspections of the upper tower and the gearboxes on turbine 3, 4, and 1. So they did the other 3. They found the same failure in turbine 2.
Whoa.
So they GE asked Rocks Wind to shut down both turbines 2 and 3. Turbines 1 and 4 have not experienced the fault. but they're going to do further evaluations, so those are still online. But this is a forced outage, and there's 7.66 megawatts of capacity not online between turbines 3 and 4. So
And so how does, I mean, the project itself, we can understand the effects of that, but how does this affect us through the contracts? Because we contracted for capacity as well as generation with that contract, correct?
Yep.
And
Yeah, so we're looking into the impacts of that, but I believe these are unit contingent contracts. So we'll send out an update once we dig into it a little bit more. Like I said, we got it yesterday, so
Okay.
we need to look into it a little bit more. But I wanted to let the board know that 2 of the turbines are off, and the other 2 are still on, and they might need to be shut off. We don't know yet. So on a positive note, we received one of the 2 level 3 EV charging stations. So it's in the office. The second unit is scheduled to be shipped in March, which also works well with our time for installation, our construction schedule. So we'll be working, on the distribution design for the line extension. But, this is the 2 units that are going at Ride Out Playground parking lot. So pretty interesting. We've kind of reviewed the one that showed up and, looked at the options. And so we got a good little start to kind of do our planning. So that's coming. And as a reminder, that's part of the grant that we received from the state. So we'll get $100,000 in funding on that. We're expecting the project to be around 130 in total. So so far, so good. We did have a storm response on December 23rd, which I emailed the board as we were, restoring things and give you guys updates. But we had a variety of areas that were impacted by the high winds with trees coming down and whatnot. Of note, we had 6 broken poles, and probably the biggest issue with that is Verizon did not respond to set poles in their set area. So we're working to set up meetings with them to discuss that, because that impacts our ability to restore power if they're not going to set a pole in their set area, which is just unacceptable. So more to come on that in the future, but we're working through those issues as well. We updated our tree trimming specifications. We hadn't updated them in a few years, so it was time to do that. And as you guys noted, probably in the budget, we're going to be trimming this year. And so we'll be putting out a bid to trim 1/4 of the system. And I believe we're going to start in the northwest quadrant and go from there. And there'll be a 4-year trimming cycle going forward. The smart meter project, still on track. We're expecting to receive the network equipment in February. And that's the first piece that we need to do. So we'll build the networking equipment in the field, and that's what the meters will be speaking to get back to billing system. The first shipment of residential meters is on target for April, and that hasn't changed. So we'll start the deployment of the residential meters first, expecting to complete those and then to move on to the commercial meters, which, as you might recall, they have a long lead time of over 60 weeks. So then on the energy management side, Center Village was one of the participants in the EV Ready pilot program. They've completed their installation of dedicated EV charging infrastructure to the each of the 12 condo owners. And they received a rebate from us of $25,000 for that. So that's exciting. It's finally done. And as of January 1st, we've expanded the pool of full battery electric vehicles that are eligible for EV purchase rebates by including the sales price eligibility. We've increased it from 50 to 55,000. So this change is in line and matches the more EV rebate from the state. So we just wanted to make sure we're in line with that. And that's my update.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm happy to see the more EV increase according with the vehicles increasing in price. They've also increased the more EV rebate itself. And it makes it simple to say if you qualify for a more EV rebate, you probably qualify based on income for Concord Light rebate as well. The Center Village and the EV Ready pilot, that is wonderful to hear that that's done. I think the other community was Riverwalk, and we should talk up that pilot and the fact that Concord Light has engineering examples for those types of multifamily homes, for those boards to have some resources to work with to decide these things at their level. So to make sure that they understand that Concord Light may be done with the rebates, but we can provide technical support to those boards trying to make those decisions on infrastructure. Alice, you have a question?
I do, just a quick question. Dave, can you just tell us about, there was a power outage 2 days ago, I think it was a couple of days ago. And I'm just curious what it was, because this time it affected our whole neighborhood, so I didn't know. There were a bunch of fire trucks across the street at Middlesex and a lot of chatter in the neighborhood.
Joe, could you speak to that?
Good morning. That was the one over the weekend.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, that happened. Let me see, that was on Sunday morning.
Sunday.
We had a phase, one of the wires burned down. Basically a tree contact. So they had to de-energize to make the repairs on that. But yeah, that's essentially what that was.
okay. I realized that without power, we couldn't get online to see if there were any messages. And so, people in the neighborhood start calling to say, hey, do you have any power? I said, no, we don't. And then you see fire trucks and you think, well, maybe something's going on.
Yep, that was it.
Okay, thank you. It was a very quick repair, I have to say, within a half hour, I think.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board on Dave's update? All right. Jason, would you like to give the broadband update?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Kind of piggybacking off of the last question, comment, and also Dave's comments about December, I just want to give a huge shout out to all the broadband staff for the December storm cleanup and restoration efforts, along with Public Works, Public Safety, CMLP, line crews. Everybody was involved in this. It was a big storm, a lot of water, a lot of wind, dangerous conditions. A lot of coordination took place. So I just want to really thank everyone for their efforts. It was not ideal conditions to be doing repairs or splicing. Most of the customers who were impacted for broadband were due to power outage. And so when the power came back on, those customers were restored. But we did have a number of laterals, fiber going to homes that was snapped and had to be repaired. And then we also did have a 96 strand fiber that served a number of customers that was damaged. And so that had to be replaced. Luckily, we have a third party who's on call 24/7 to help with big restoration efforts like that. So within a few hours, they had replaced that 96 strand fiber and restored service to all those customers. But it was a lot of coordination. We heard a lot of feedback from people too afterward, just thanking us for the information and for the customer service folks who were giving out information and all the efforts to get things back on running quickly. So again, thank you to all the staff who were involved in that effort. December, despite that storm and despite being down a technician, was a strong month for new installs. We had 25 new installations and only 5 disconnects. So we netted 20 customers that month, which for December is pretty good, despite also cold weather in the first half of the month. We've more recently had some pretty good weather and temperature wise. And so we've been able to continue to splice with that. We also have 2 vacancies that we're working hard to fill. We have the network engineer and the telecom technician. We are conducting a second round interview this week for telecom technician. We're very optimistic for that applicant. And then we have, I think, 5 first round interviews scheduled or being scheduled for the network engineer position. And hopefully those will pan out. We are very optimistic with the pools that we have. So that's a good place to be in. And then the final piece of my update was on January 1st, the new tiers that we've been talking about for the last few months went into effect. We've already had a couple customers call and request the new speeds, and we've been able to process those changes, and all the tests worked, all the billing system seems ready, the new bandwidth profiles in our management system were set up correctly, and everything is going well so far. We did want to kind of do a soft launch and not start the marketing campaign on January 1st, just to make sure that everything was working smoothly, and it is. So we're now in talks with the team and customer service to figure out the best way to start rolling out the news about this. I'll also just mention that anybody who is on the lowest tier for residential service did get a bump at no cost up to 45 over 45, and that change has been made already. So we're monitoring the impacts on that as well, because interestingly, a small change like that for a large number of customers can have a bigger impact than raising the highest speed, even doubling it or tripling it, because you're only dealing with a small number of customers. But there will be some communications going out to let people know about these changes soon on the website, social media, potential mailings, and also customers who provided email addresses for getting marketing emails and messages. So there was a lot of coordination that went into that. So there was internal staff, a lot of testing, a lot of planning. We had to build entire test networks and test ONTs, and it's all gone really well. And just want to thank everyone for their efforts on that. And the customers seem to be really happy with it so far. So I also, provided a lengthy paper update with additional metrics. And I hope next month to be giving a little bit of a talk on the fiber broadband completion task force updates, just kind of giving a snapshot of where we are and where we've come from all of those recommendations from that task force. And that's my update.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Warren, you have a question.
Yes, thanks. That was very helpful. Excuse me. Do you, now that you're doing this new marketing and you have the new rates, do you have a trajectory of the number of new customers you expect to bring online over the next 6 months or a year?
So we do, based on, we look at the historical models for the interested customers. So we have people who submit an order form, and we track that monthly, and those metrics are in the monthly updates I provide. And then we look at our, our success rate in converting those customers, our conversion rate. And so we use those as benchmarks internally and have for the last 6 to 9 months. So we can say, okay, last month we converted 50-something%. This month, it was 60%. And then it fluctuates from time to time, but there's a lot of external factors, right? So if in a month we get 30 customers who are interested, but 20 of them need a lot of additional infrastructure to be ready, and another month we get 30 and 29 of them are all ready to go, 15 were previous customers from, they had moved into a place that already had Concord broadband service before. So there's a lot of variables. It's very difficult to determine how quickly we can install that. And then there's also, of course, COVID, illness, things like that impact our ability to complete those installs. So even just where you are physically, if you're on a busy road, you're going to require a detail to do that work, and has to be scheduled. Might take an extra few days or a week to get that scheduled. But so it is hard to predict who's going to want or need the service and how quickly we're going to be able to turn it over. But we're anticipating that the majority of the impact on the rate changes will be for existing customers who are interested in increasing the speed. But we do think that increasing the lower residential entry tier might encourage some people who are at a very low tier with Comcast to move over because of being a more competitive rate. I think before at 30, it was hard to compare to the 50 that Comcast would start at for a lot of customers. So we do think that we'll see an increase. We're already looking at, we had some estimates, some budget estimates in terms of the impact, and we're kind of tracing the number of customers that move to that tier. But I think it won't be until we start really broadcasting the message that we see how big of an impact that it has. But we do have estimates. And if you'd like, I can get some more detail ready for another meeting and kind of show you more, if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Pam, you have a question.
Yeah, just this is kind of a theme with me, but there's a lot of hiring that goes on, I think, at the light plant. And I just encourage those doing the hiring to be thinking about our diversity goals. And because hiring is one of those few places where we can actually maybe make a difference in terms of increasing the diversity of our workforce. So I just wanted to make sure, I hope that people are paying close attention to that. Dave, I know you've responded on that previously, but it's worth reiterating, I think.
Agreed. Thank you.
Excellent. And I had one question for you, Jason. Now that the new pricing structure is out, the income qualified assistance, I don't see that immediately on the pricing page for the website. Can you tell us the status of that with the new rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a program that we're pursuing. It's a lengthy application process, and it's going to take several weeks for us to get enrolled and accepted into that program. And so we have begun preparing our application, and it's just a lot of data that goes into it. There's also some requirements to be a part of that program. So while one team is kind of preparing the data and the analytics that are required for the application, another team is doing some other types of analysis to make sure that the concessions that we have to make and things that we have to agree upon are financially worth it for us to enroll in the program, as opposed to just offer this subsidy on our own and eat the cost. Because what we don't want to do is, if we have 20 customers that enroll in this program, but we end up having to spend a lot more money based on the other requirements of the program, it's going to be a net loss for us, and it's not really going to help the town, because we could have just subsidized those customers at the same rate and it been more financially stable. So we're still moving forward with the application, but we're also trying to run those numbers to make sure that we're going to pick the right path that's going to be the best for the customers and CMLP. But I would anticipate by next month we'll have an update on the status of that.
Okay. I don't think maybe I missed it, but I don't think I was aware that there was a program we were applying for. So do you feel that you'd be ready to present on that topic to the board, on which path you feel is best, whether it be we offer a discount and other customers just cover that, versus this program that subsidizes that offering? Do you feel you could discuss that with the board at a future meeting?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have an update next month and on the status of the application. But like I said, we are preparing the application. But when we sat down and went through it a month and a half ago with our new broadband manager, we did realize that we were going to be required to offer additional services and equipment and things at no or low cost that would have financial impact. And so we were just trying to explore which path was going to be best, but we're still moving forward with the application. So yeah, so next month, either I will tell you that our application is in and we're either accepted or still it's pending, or I will tell you that we've looked and run the numbers and determined that it's going to be, less money if we just offer the subsidy ourselves. So yes, I'll definitely provide an update next month.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Anyone else on the board have a question for Jason? Seeing none, I think we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which requires that we do a motion to suspend the regular meeting and open up a rate hearing. Alice, could I ask that you make a motion? Would that be all right?
Let's go off mute. Sure. I move that we suspend our regular meeting to go into a rate hearing and return to a regular session after the hearing.
I second.
Thank you. Alice?
Yes.
Warren? Oh, I think you're.
Yes.
And Pam? And I agree as well. So we have opened up the rate hearing. And Dave, would you like Laura to take this, or would you like to take this?
Yeah, Laura's going to present this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Laura, you're muted.
Yeah, if you could bring up that memo that was distributed to the board, that would be helpful. So I'm not sure if all of the board members have been exposed to a NYPA rate adjustment. Warren, perhaps you have not?
I have not.
You have not, okay. So when Dave brings up this memo, maybe I'll give you a little bit more background than the other board members need to consider this, because this is a regular periodic rate adjustment that we need to make in this account. And so some of the board members have seen this before.
Just give me a second. I'm trying to find it. I had it opened.
Oh, I can, I think I can bring it up if you.
I got it. I have it.
Okay.
Okay. Can we see that?
Yep.
Yes. Maybe make it just a tad smaller, Dave. So, Warren, the federal and state governments that worked to prepare the contractual arrangements to distribute the power that's generated from the Niagara Rivers hydro facilities in New York is governed by a company called the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company. And right now, Concord is entitled to 2.09% of the capacity and energy that's made available to the state of Massachusetts from that facility. It's a long-term contract. The facility was relicensed in 2007. So we expect to receive clean power from this resource for a number of years. And there are some rules that go along with our taking of this power. The power is typically a lower cost resource in our portfolio than other alternatives. And we are required to pass on the benefit of this lower cost power to residential customers. So it's been our custom to place a credit on customer bills that's applicable to the first 75 kilowatt hours of usage each month that represents the benefit of the power. And the calculation of the benefit is done by MWEC and is equal to the difference between what the NYPA power costs and what the prevailing market price is. We do have to wheel the power across the state of New York, and the cost to do so, the transmission does vary over time. So it's difficult to predict what this benefit's going to be. Furthermore, MWEC reports this benefit 2 months in arrears and sometimes longer. So for example, I don't yet have the actual benefit numbers for October 2022. So we're trying to maintain a separate accounting for this, the benefit of this power, because it needs to be reserved exclusively for residential customers. It doesn't apply to commercial customers. So if you would go, Dave, just scroll down a little bit to that table. I'll go back to the graph in a minute. But this is a table that shows in the third column, it says savings. This is what MWEC calculates as the benefit of the NYPA power per year. And you can see that it's varied between as little as 86,000 and as much as 361. That 361 is in italics because it's an estimate. As I said, I don't have October, November, December, and I'm estimating what that is. But I do believe it's going to be the biggest year in recent history. And why is that? Why is the benefit vary so much, and why is it so big this year? If you go back to that chart, Dave, on the previous page, this is a chart of the market value against which MWEC compares the cost of the NYPA power to determine the benefit. And since the NYPA resource is largely fixed in nature, the higher the market price, the bigger the difference between the NYPA contract price and the market price, and the bigger the benefit. And you can see in 2022, we had historically very high prevailing market prices. And that's why the benefit's been so big in 2022. And so I'm estimating, if you go back to the table now, Dave, that by the end of 2022, we are going to have about $50,000 remaining in this account. Go down a little bit more, Dave, to the next chart, chart 2. And what this will show you is the savings is the blue bars, the credit is in red, and then the green line shows the balance in the account. So in 2018, you can see the savings continually were higher than the credit we were giving in the bills. And so the balance was growing at the green line. In 2019, we increased the credit and it was higher than what the savings were. And therefore the balance in that account is drawn down. And that, it just happens over time that we have these differences. In 2022, if you recall, we had to increase the purchase cost adjustment on customer bills significantly starting in July. And so we had about $300,000 in the NIPA account, and the board chose to increase the NIPA credit on the bills substantially. We brought it up to 15 cents. That's why the red bars are so high. And we drew that balance down to where it is today at about 50,000. As we look forward, and Dave, if you'll go down to the final table, if we try to look forward, and again, just like Jason's estimate of new customers, there are a lot of variables that go into this, and it's difficult to forecast what we should place the NIPA credit at. But I'm showing 4 different options here. The first variable that we have to consider is, are prices going to stay at those high levels we saw on the chart? Are they going to return to more historical norms? If the pricing remains high, we can offer a larger credit on the bill. The second variable is what the board wants to do with the balance. Do you want to maintain the $50,000 balance? Do you want to increase that somewhat as a conservative plan for the future? And so if you want to increase the balance, the credit must be lower. If you want to maintain the balance, it can be higher. So with historical pricing and maintaining the balance, I'm estimating the NIPA credit could be about 2 cents, 1.9 cents. If you wanted to bank on the current pricing remaining intact, the credit could be as high as 4.9 cents. And the other numbers below show what the credit could be if you want to increase the balance. So given this uncertainty, I think I would recommend that we change the NIPA credit from its current rate of 15 cents per kilowatt hour for the first 75 kilowatt hours to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And, we'll revisit it as we get actual numbers and we see what's happening with prevailing market prices. And if we need to adjust it up or down further, it's always the board's prerogative to do so.
And just to add to what Laura was saying, one thing that I just wanted to mention, Wendy did make a recommendation a while back to have the balance not go below 50. And so we're right at that number right now. So I think that's important to remind the board of.
Thank you. Good point.
Great. So I agree. We did what we'd hoped to do, which was to increase the credit for the 6 months that we had the PCA in effect, to draw down that balance, to relieve customers of some of those higher prices. My opinion is I'd like to see something close to that 2 cent recommendation that Laura has, that either maintains or potentially grows the balance in this account, and that when the account again reaches that $250,000+ level, we can come back and readjust, because the markets are still quite volatile. That chart that was up there showing the market value per megawatt hour, you can see how the recent market, the spot market, has just been high recently. So hopefully that will mean savings for this account, and this account will grow quickly. But I'm in favor of the 2 cent recommendation. Warren, would you like to give a question?
Yeah, as Laura said, there are 2 variables, whether to try to build the account up to 100,000 or not. That seems like a good idea. But in terms of the projection about where prices will be, it does seem unrealistic to think, and we hope they're not going to stay at the current rate. But it also seems to me that the most likely trajectory for 2023 is not that they're going to go down to historic rates, but that it's going to be somewhere between current rates and historic rates. So I'm not sure why we would set this based on historic prices, and instead, shouldn't we be assuming that rates will be, the most likely trajectory is that rates will be somewhere between, and so maybe instead of either a 4 cents or a 2 cents, a 3-cent credit would be more appropriate.
Okay. Alice, you'd like to add to this?
Would. I also agree that we should work on building our balance in that account. I think you mentioned 250, Brian. I heard recommendations of 100. I believe that the board has tried to maintain, we've discussed it, several times over the last few years, of about 100,000. I would think that we should be building our balance. I don't think any one of us has the power, probably Laura more than anyone, to predict the markets. And the one thing I've learned, and maybe I haven't learned it well enough yet, is that if we make a mistake in our structure, our rate structure, we can come back and have another hearing and admit that we didn't guess the market correctly and that we're making another adjustment. So I would feel comfortable changing the credit so that we start building our balance and probably try to maintain it at about 100,000. I'm uncomfortable at the 50 or hovering around 50 or below. It makes me feel a little anxious.
Yeah, and to Alice's point, this isn't something that we have to adjust once a year. We can adjust it, as needed. So, say we're at, 6 months from now, we're like, okay, we're at the 100,000. We want to adjust it. We can.
Excellent. Any other comments? So do we need to close the rate hearing before we recommend action, or do we do that in the rate hearing?
I think you can open it up to public comment if the board doesn't have any other questions.
Okay.
And then you can vote on it after.
All right. Is there any public comments for the rate hearing? I don't see anyone raising their hands. So, okay. Pamela.
I agree, you should raise the rates. I don't think the transition to greening the energy is going to be cheap. So I don't think the rates are going to, the power costs are going to go back to historical until we've transitioned to all solar, wind, and battery, and that's going to be expensive and take a while.
Great, thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none.
Brian?
Yes. Oh,
I have a
Bill.
comment.
Bill,
Oh.
did you want to make a public comment, Bill?
Yes, please.
Okay.
What is the impact on the average electric bill of this change?
Well, the current credit, I believe, if you consume 75 kilowatts, is something like $11 because we moved it up to the 15 cents, but that's not maintainable. I think it says here, if I'm reading it correctly, that if we put it at 2 cents, that is a 50-cent credit. Is that right, Laura, for bills?
No, Dave, if you can you bring up that memo again? There is a final table, which I'm sorry, I failed to call attention to and would answer Phil's question.
$1.43.
Yeah, what this shows is that, as Brian said, the current credit is 15 cents on 75 kilowatt hours, which is $11.25. And if we go to 2 cents, the credit would be between $1.50 and $1.75. So it'd be quite a decrease from the current level, but as Brian said, the current level is not sustainable. So the ranges here we're talking about, though, Phil, are somewhere between like 75 cents and $3 per bill per month per customer.
Thank you.
Great. Any other public comments before we close the rate here, or vote and then close the rate hearing? Please raise your hand so I can see. I don't see any other comments. we've talked about two different values. We've talked about a 2 cent and a 3 cent value. What is as a straw poll? What do people feel is the right amount to set this at? Pam, I haven't heard your opinion yet.
I think I'd stick with, unless Laura and Dave have a different point of view now based on the discussion, I would stick with the 2 cents.
Yeah, our recommendation is 2 cents.
Warren, how do you feel about 2 cents?
I don't see it. I mean, only because I would think in general, we should be looking at a scenario where there's an equal chance of erring on either side. And it seems to me that the 2 cent scenario is assuming something at the extreme list of the realm of possibilities. I'm sorry if I'm a little unclear. I just got in from a plane last night. I'm also just getting over COVID too.
Oh,
So, I mean, I would be okay with the 3 cents. I agree with Warren that 2 cents, does have a very conservative bent to it. I think the board has taken that bent in the past, which is why we presented it. But I think Warren is statistically correct that the current forward price is the 50-50 mark. And so if you want to do a 50-50 decision and not, a conservative decision, then something closer to 3 cents would be appropriate. I think it's really just a decision by the board on what sort of stance you want to take.
And if I could say one other thing related to that, is if we weren't at the same time coming up with a trajectory that was going to try to build the reserve up from $50,000 to $100,000, I might feel differently about it. But it seems like there's not necessarily a case why to be conservative in two ways as opposed to in one way.
yeah, that's my, I hope the decision we make increases the balance from 50 to closer to 100 in 6 months or a year. I would be afraid to go larger than 3 cents because that could maintain the 50 balance, which puts us at risk of, well, if conditions change and prices go down, that we may under collect and will be at 25,000 for the balance. That's my only concern, is going lower. So I'm okay with 3 cents. Alice, how do you feel?
In these circumstances, I opt to be more cautious and risk averse. So I probably would lean toward the lower end. And what could we do, a 2.5? Split the difference? Or is that too difficult for us to calculate?
It's not a problem if that's what's voted on.
I prefer less risk in these kind of situations, and I think the markets are volatile enough that we just don't know. I understand the arguments.
Yeah.
So that is just my general thought.
Yeah, and I think the difference between 2 cents and 3 cents, I don't think is huge. It is thousands of dollars, but I don't think it's not 15 cents. That's what we have to change from. So I'm gonna propose as a straw poll to say that we're going to recommend 2.5 cents as the new NYPA credit. And I'm going to do a quick straw poll, yay or nay. Warren?
Nay.
Pam?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
And I would agree with that. I think we'll come back to this, Warren, if we see the balance going up dramatically, and we'll increase it.
Okay.
And then you can gloat for us and say, I predicted. And we'll all
Feel free. All right.
You're
And
probably right, but
now I'd like to close.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just is there a back of the envelope sort of projection on what that protected balance of 50 is going to be at 2.5 cents? Or is that, Laura, if that's too much to ask? I mean, I'm just curious because we want to build, if anything, I would think. Is there any significant difference in these numbers?
if you give me a few, I don't want to do this on the fly. If you give me a few minutes to think about it and calculate it, I can tell you, but I just need, probably.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's probably margin, the differences must be marginal at 2.5 and 3 and 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to take airtime if these are marginal differences. I'm not interested in making you go through an exercise. It's not going to help too much.
Just give me a second. I'm just doing some arithmetic here. Okay, so the total credit for the year given to customers at 2 cents is like $123,000. At 2.5, it's 153,000. And at 3, it's 183,000. So basically, you're talking about for each half cent, it's about $30,000 a year.
And the current balance is 49,000 something.
Right.
Okay. Are you okay, Pam, for me to close the rate?
I'm good.
So we need to do a vote. Would someone like to make a motion to close the rate hearing?
I move that we close the rate hearing and return to the regular meeting.
Right. Alice, do you want to give a second?
Second.
All right. Warren,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Great.
You're losing power in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
done.
Bill, do you mind reading?
I go down.
Thank you. All right, so we've closed the rate hearing, and we're going to move on to the next agenda topic, which is public meeting roadmaps.
Yep. Brian, you still need to vote on it.
No, sorry, I'm terrible with the process. Sorry.
Then you can move on.
All right, so we're gonna have Alice, you're good at motions. Do you mind making a motion for the
Yeah,
two?
sure. Yep. I move that the board approve a rate change for the NIPA credit to 2.5 cents.
Great. And do I have a second?
I second.
Second. Thank you. And Warren,
No.
Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and I agree as well. So 3-1 vote in favor. Thank you. All right, now I think we can move on. And the next topic is the public meetings roadmap. So I had sent out a quick kind of agenda topics for 2023 document to the board to kind of go over the public meetings. And then I added on the other end some of the regular meeting topics. For our discussion, we are going to focus on setting dates for the two public meetings, one on the middle school solar and the other on the nuclear generation within our power supply portfolio. These are requested public meetings, probably held in the evening, so the public can more readily attend. So I wanted to would you like me to go through kind of what each meeting will cover before we discuss this, or do we just want to go into discussing dates on when we can hold these meetings? Pam.
I just wonder how, tell us how voluminous were the requests? How did they come in? What are the requests?
Sure. This board has made many requests to have a detailed discussion about the middle school solar installation, as well as some in the community have asked for a detailed breakdown of what it will look like, how is it going to get done. So we need to have that meeting to show the public what it will look like and get feedback from them on the installation.
So this is just a regular meeting of ours that is open to the public, as are all meetings. What is the difference here?
This would be advertised, it would be held probably in the evening, and it would be focused on the middle school solar project specifically. And the public would be invited to attend. We may have members from the middle school planning board, building committee attend as well as, and we may call in SDA, which
So
is,
my question, I mean, I understand, I think we need to have such a meeting. The question is, has the public asked to have this enhanced?
Yeah.
And how many members of the public have asked to have this enhanced experience?
more than a handful directly, and I've heard it come up many times. I've heard it come up at these meetings many times that we need to have this meeting. Alice.
Yeah. So I think that we should have a public meeting of some sort, and I think with the timing is kind of critical, because there will be a public hearing in advance of town meeting where we present what we're asking for funding and how we're going to fund it. And I think that as much information that we can provide people about why we're putting this in and what it's going to look like, and get feedback and have a dialogue, we would be better prepared for the public hearing and then for the vote. So
Yeah.
I think it is critical, and I think people have opinions in town about battery storage, and I'm sure we'll hear about that. And I think those are good reasons to have an open conversation, but I would time it sometime pretty far in advance of the public hearing, so people are aware that we're thinking about it and we want to get their opinions as we go into this.
Yes, I think this is, this meeting is important for the town meeting process for the article, because it allows us to have a discussion about the project, whereas the town meeting hearing is going to be focused on the article and the request for funding. And I think this meeting will answer a lot of questions that are maybe inappropriate for a funding request at town meeting hearing. Warren, you have a question.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Alice and Brian said about the middle school solar meeting. That seems like a good idea. My question or concern is about the nuclear meeting, not about the need for it. I think it's a good idea, but how you envision it unfolding. I could see that being a meeting which leads to a lot of acrimony and emotional comments and not a lot of useful information. How would you think about structuring it?
Yeah, so I provided a lot of detail in the document that I shared, and it's fine if you weren't able to go through all the detail, but it is, you're absolutely right, Warren. This conversation about nuclear needs to be put into context, and the general public can't do that without a lot of education. So the 2/3 of the meeting is going to be educating the public on, what our strategy and plan is around certificates, how nuclear fits in as dispatchable, inexpensive, non-emitting generation, what that means, before we propose the question of, well, how much nuclear should we have in our portfolio, which is the goal of this meeting. So it is going to require a heavy lift. But the good thing is that this is not something this board needs to discuss and create, because it's something we're already doing today. And this is a question of, do we want to add more nuclear in the future, or do we want to remove nuclear from our portfolio over time? It's not so much, do we want to change our power supply strategy for non-emitting resources? Pam,
Yeah, I just wanted to be very clear that my probe earlier was not to express skepticism about a public meeting on solar. I just wanted to flesh out, where we came from on the decision to do that. So I very much support the comments that Alice made with respect to timing and relationship to the to other things. So I just want to be clear on that. On nuclear, I also think Warren makes a very good point. I wonder whether the board is the board unanimous in our view of generally on the on how nuclear will fit into our portfolio going forward, or do we have internal differences? And if we do, I think those should be probably discussed before we meet with the public. But we have, one of the things that I wanted, because I had detected differences of opinion earlier, was that the board have a conversation about this. What, have we already had it and I missed it or something? Or
Well, I think a big part of the need for this meeting is the board needs community feedback on this topic, because we've had discussions about nuclear contracts at this meeting, and we do differ on opinion, and we want to know what the community as a whole wants. That was the driver for having this meeting. So we can't, as a committee, come to a consensus, because the reason we need outside opinions to come to consensus. So I don't, there's like a loop happening if you phrase it, if you structure.
Yeah. I think we really need to think about this, because I think, Warren, there's a very high emotional quality to this whole thing, and there's a lot of data that the public may not know about. And I think that the there's a lot of very, very, very sophisticated thinkers, are very, very clear on a lot of this stuff. And I just think might be good for us to have a better sense on our board about, what are the kinds of things that we want to, the direction we might want to go before we seek public input, which may be quite fraught.
Well, that's what we want to hear. That's the point. We want that feedback to understand. So we need that feedback for us to reach a consensus and understanding of what the community desires within their generation sources. But I feel this is a great opportunity for the light plant to showcase how, since 2017 in Article 51, we've gone from 97% emitting resources to today we're at 94% non-emitting resources, and share with the community the way that we've done that is additional to the state efforts, and ask the question, do we want to invest into Seabrook with contracts, or do we want to invest into projects of wind that haven't been built yet, but the pricing will go up? I think those are the kinds of discussions that we should share what we're doing with the community, so that they can better understand our efforts and our accomplishments.
Well, I would just ask that the board think very carefully about just the order of how we go about this. And also, it's getting information on such a complex subject and then having to live with that information.
Yeah.
And making sure you know how to respond to that information is extremely complicated. And I just think we need to be very, very careful about this very, very complicated subject, which is filled with a lot of emotional energy. And so I just want to get a sense from Alice and Warren, and maybe Dave and Laura, should we be having a little bit of, prep for this in a much more substantive way than we seem to be headed for? That's I really, it's kind of like, when you're prepping for any kind of hearing or something, you need to know a little bit about where you're headed and what you need to do with whatever the data is that you're going to get served up.
Okay, so where we're headed, I did write up where I think we're headed. What we're going to receive, I believe, will just be an emotional tone from the community. Is that emotional tone one of, we don't want nuclear at any, we want to pay more and not have nuclear? Or do we want to embrace nuclear so that electricity remains more affordable?
I get that. Sorry, Brian. I want to hear from Alice and Warren on this, because it's a very
Alice then.
yeah.
All right, Alice.
Okay, so I think this topic needs a further discussion before we decide tonight, this morning, whatever time it is. When we want to have this hearing, or this meeting, maybe we think of it, it is a very emotionally fraught issue, and that's exactly why people have asked us to have a conversation. But we can't avoid having the public hearing and having that dialogue, because our hearing, we set rates, we determine power contracts that would be part of our portfolio. And we need a construct to make that decision. We can't be making a decision because 5 people feel emotionally one way or another. That
I
our
agree.
community has asked us, well, why do we want nuclear? I remember the conversation when Terry Ackerman said, I'm against any additional solar, any additional nuclear. I don't want any nuclear. And I don't know how widespread that belief is. And I think it's a conversation we need to have, like, where is nuclear in the current thinking as the drive towards greenhouse gas reductions is critical globally. And, I don't rely on the light plan to answer that question. Don't rely on the light board to answer it, but bring in some experts who can help us talk about it, the pros and cons of why people are going back to nuclear and why that's part of a long-term solution. I don't know that we should come in with a board opinion about where we want to go, but we are asked in our rate setting hearings to make these decisions, and we're making them right now in a vacuum.
So may I just because if this is very helpful, I guess what I'm hearing Alice say is the objective of this meeting would be to educate, that it would be a meeting that is, you've asked a lot of questions about nuclear. This is what the experts say. Here are the variables, and we want you to have that information in front of you as we go forward. It's not primarily, is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, so 2 parts. One, education, and once educated, sentiment. What is the community sentiment on these technologies, and how they fit into how we design their portfolio? Because like the example I mentioned earlier, we could do the ideal of investing into wind projects and solar projects that don't exist today to build out renewables in New England. We could cite more of that in town. But there's a huge expense related to that. Nuclear allows us to use existing technology today that is half the price of those options. And if we make electricity 50 cents a kilowatt hour because we're reaching our ideals, we may reach our ideals, but no one will use it because it's too pricey to charge their car versus gas, or heat their home for a heat pump. So it's sharing the education of that with the community, and then getting their feedback as a community to say, given this information, how do you feel? And then
your comment itself is gets into, this is a very complicated cost benefit calculation. I mean, your cost benefit was at the surface with, well, it's going to be expensive to do this and cheaper to do that. The public's going to want to know about the safety implications and everything else. I think I want the public to become comfortable with nuclear. I'm just suggesting that the way to get there is going to require a lot of work on the part, I guess, of the light plant, and maybe bringing in, I was happy to hear that experts might come in. We could bring people in from MIT where there's a lot of work that's been done on that stuff. But anyway, I've spoken, I've said too much.
I was thinking that we would have Warren, I will get to you next. You're being very patient. I was thinking of having the middle school solar discussion in February, and having this discussion about nuclear sometime in maybe April. So we do have time before we talk about nuclear to have board discussions to prepare for this meeting. So I don't think we have to flush that out right now, but I do want to set, timeframes to have these meetings so that we can make a schedule to be prepared for them. Warren.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple things. The April timeframe, that sounds good. I like that, Brian. Getting back to Pam's initial point, I do think we should have a board discussion about this before that meeting, in part because we
absolutely
look Otherwise, we look like dummies when folks say you're having this hearing and somebody says, well, have you discussed it at the board? And we say, no, we've never talked about nuclear. And then I think in terms of the hearing, what you were saying at the end, Brian, sound right, and this is going along with Alice, that the meeting should focus on very explicitly, here are arguments and reasons for including nuclear in the portfolio. Here are arguments and reasons for not including it. And now we want your reactions. I looked briefly at what you wrote up, Brian, your envision for that hearing. I think people will think of that as a bait and switch.
Mhm.
If
Okay,
we say this is a hearing about nuclear, and then they come and get a presentation about everything we've done to buy RECs over the past years, and here's the whole strategy.
yeah,
It's going to seem like we're deferring from the real question, and we should focus on a very clear presentation, the arguments for nuclear and the arguments against. But as part of that, we should talk about the strategy we've been using, but that
so
should be the clear focus.
yeah, so to your point, Warren, the title is nuclear because that's the genesis of where this request for a public meeting came from. But if you see in the document, I put the title of this meeting should be Concord Light's reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from its power supplies portfolio and future planning. So that's more of what the title is when it goes out to the public. It's not going to be ask us about nuclear. I mean, we will mention in the advertisements that we're going to talk about nuclear and different generation sources, but it is a meeting about how we're meeting Article 51's 2030 goal of non-emitting electricity.
That could be a
would disagree
useful,
with that.
if I could say, that could be a useful meeting, but I don't think that's a meeting where we'll get a lot of useful feedback from the public about nuclear.
Right.
I agree with
With that. Can I suggest that maybe, Brian, you shouldn't be shouldering and burdened with, designing all of this. I mean, I
This
think
is the first draft.
these two meetings are very important. And I think it might be useful. I hate to offer up Alice, but I think Alice, as a former select board member, et cetera, might be a useful person to bring into the mix, to have a little mini subcommittee that talks about, well, what should it look like, and what should the prior meeting with the board look like? And I would suggest it's important to have the appropriate member of the light plant at such a planning set. I just don't want you to feel you have to take care of this whole thing, because I think we need to think carefully about it.
I think this has been a very good discussion. I want to hear from Dave and Laura about their thoughts of this discussion. And I also would like to conclude this discussion with an agreement of in February, we're going to talk about the solar project at the middle school, and that we're going to target April for a time to talk about this topic about our power supply portfolio / nuclear. And we can, between now and April, work on all the details of what that meeting will look like. But I want to put a deadline in front of us to say we're going to do this in April. And I want to hear from each of you. Are those 2 months for those 2 meetings? Do you feel we can accomplish that? Do you feel that's appropriate? Warren, do you feel that's an appropriate target? Okay, Alice?
My only concern about April is that that's town meeting. People get pretty meetinged out by all the hearings that lead up to town meeting, then going through 4 days of town meeting.
Well,
So logistically, it's not our best month for bringing people together for a conversation that's as detailed as this one.
well, well, Pam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm absolutely on the solar in February. And whatever, recognizing Alice's good point, an agreement to get at this, whatever this meeting is, for sometime in April, recognizing that there needs to be some prep work done on that one in a special way.
Okay, so I still want Laura and Dave's feedback on this discussion. Do you have any thoughts on what was been discussed?
I think the public meeting on the solar in February is, timing is appropriate, and I think we should do that. Nuclear, the nuclear discussion, I think we really need to, you know, be organized and prepared for that, because, we do have, a decent chunk of our portfolio that has nuclear. That was part of Article 51 that said, hey, you can do this. And if we, for some reason lose nuclear, it's going to be very hard to maintain, a carbon-free supply. But having said that, I think it's important to hear from our customers, right? So having that meeting in April or May is perfect, gives us time to get prepared. I do agree with Alice. It is tricky with all the meetings through February and March, and then town meeting, in April. So if for some reason that meeting was pushed out a month, I wouldn't have an issue with that. I think it's, we have contracts right now. It's if there's opportunities that come up between now and then, we already deferred on one, the last one that came up. And I just think, if we want to hear from the public, I think it's important to do that this year and, before June. So if it's April, it's April. If it's May, it's fine. But I think we do want to hear from the public. And I think we want to make sure everyone's educated on how we get to the, how we maintain the 2030 goal. Right. And so as Brian said, we're there now for the most part. We've met that goal, and that's great, but we have to maintain that. And that's going to be the challenge for us going forward. And it doesn't just, tie in with nuclear, wind contracts come up, solar contracts are going to come up to an end. And, how do we continue to stay carbon free? That's going to be our challenge going forward, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Any thoughts, Laura?
No further comment. Thank you.
All right, great. So I'm going to end discussion saying that the board agrees that we're going to figure out a date for the middle school in February, and that we're going to figure out a date for April with the understanding that it might get pushed to May based on town meeting and whatever developments happen over the next 4 months. Great. So I'm going to move on to the warrant article for the middle school solar project. Dave, would you like to take this?
Yes. So Alice and I worked on some language based off of what I previously put together. I can share that if you'd like, just to make sure the board has seen it. And then we can just kind of go through it. It has been submitted. So can you guys see that?
Yes, it's a little small, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think everybody has a copy in their packet.
Yes.
How's that? Is that any better?
Looks good.
Perfect.
Okay. So this is the language that we put together for the town meeting. Obviously, an article number hasn't been assigned at this point, but this is a debt authorization for the solar and the storage. What I previously put in didn't include the storage, but based on the feedback from the board, we put it in there. It's based off the estimates that we got from SDA. So it's all inclusive. I don't know, Alice, if you want to speak to any of the language that we added.
Well, I think the thing that I thought we needed to do is have in that article language, say what we're doing, which was to install solar and with battery storage. And that was the major difference. And we made the financial adjustment based on the very preliminary cost estimates that we got from SDA. So I think it was just a way to people could read that first intro paragraph and understand what we're trying to do. And then we just expanded the discussion part so people understand it in context.
You're muted, Brian.
Does anyone on the board have any additional comments they'd like to add? It's already been submitted, but I think this is a well-worded article. I appreciate the changes that included storage. We're not required by this article to install the storage. We could borrow just to do the array, but it's good to see that if we're approved for storage, that we also could do that as well.
And one of the things, Brian, that probably worth mentioning is this will go through the hearing process as well. So typically the chair would present on this and I can work with you on the presentation.
Excellent. That'd be great. Happy to do it. Does the board have any final comments before we move on? I don't.
Just thank you. Just thanks for that. And I'm glad about the battery storage component as well. Thank you.
Yeah, looks good.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Save some time. The R1 tiered rates. I requested that this be added to the agenda to follow up on a discussion from last month about the tiered structure. So Dave, would you like Laura to take this? I think there's a presentation.
Yeah, so we can go through a quick presentation and I'll pull it up, and Laura, if you want to go through it, that'd be great. Is that, can you guys see that okay?
Perfect.
I'll just note that I went back and listened to the November 2022 board meeting, during which there was last a discussion about eliminating the tiered pricing immediately. And there were differences on the board about this. However, based on my reading and understanding of the language that was used, I do believe a majority of the board voted in favor of accepting the light plant's recommendation on this topic, which was not to eliminate the tiered pricing right now, because 3 reasons. One, we are going to time of use next, and going to time of use will eliminate this problem, and it just solves it completely. Number 2, there's been concern that it will just be too long before we get to time of use pricing, and so we want to eliminate the tiers now. We are in the, first of all, we just changed rates. I haven't even filed them with the DPU yet. We had a full rate change on January 1st. To go through another one is very time consuming for the light plant staff. I also, more importantly, feel that it's going to detract from the message we're trying to send our customers. Carol Hilton and I have been working on monthly communications to the customer base about the new AMS meters and the switch to time of use pricing. And we're trying to get their attention, their focus, and their excitement about moving to time of use using these communications. If we have to stop that campaign to go and explain changes to their bills in the immediate term, that's going to, detract from the effort we're placing there. So there are a number of reasons why I think this is not a good idea. But I also did hear at that November meeting that while a majority said they didn't want to change the eliminate the price tiers now, but wanted to make it part of a larger discussion in the new year when you guys discuss rate philosophy, there was a request for more analysis. And so to answer and respond to that request, I've put together the following presentation. So with that, Dave, if you could go to the next slide. So for anyone who's not familiar with CMLP's current rates, the rates charged to residential R1 customers vary depending on how much a customer uses in a single month. The first 657 kilowatt hours are charged at a rate of 0.04107 cents per kilowatt hour. The next 178 cost more. They cost about 5.3 cents. And then all kilowatt hours in excess of 835 cost 7.7 cents. This is all for just capacity, the capacity portion of the bill. The distribution and energy rates don't vary with the volume of the usage. They simply remain the same. So what the idea here is that instead of charging these different rates for different amounts, you would collapse the tiers and everybody would pay the same amount for capacity. And we'll see on the next slide that, well, don't go there quite yet, Dave, sorry. We'll see on the next slide that the rate that would be revenue neutral to collapse the tiers would go up, would be 5.395 cents. So that's more than the lowest tier price, it's more than the middle tier price, but it's less than the highest tier price. So the result of this would be that some customers, generally the smaller volume users, would end up paying more for their electricity over the year. And then other customers, a much smaller set of customers, who are generally the larger volume users, would end up paying less. Okay, now the next slide, please, Dave. So this is simply showing a calculation of what produces a revenue neutral rate. And we can see in the base case, we have an estimate of how much volume we would sell in the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, total volume being just under 70 million kilowatt hours. And so right now, with the tiered rates, using those volumes, we would expect to collect 3.769 million in revenue from capacity from those customers, and collapsing that to just a single rate for the full 69.86 million kilowatt hours would result in the price needing to be 0.05395 cents. So when added to the distribution and energy, you're now talking about an all-in price for R1 customers of 20.4 cents. And that compares to the 1/1 January 23 rate of 19.1, 20.4, and 22.7. Okay, the next slide is the impact on customers. And what we've done here is modeled what each and every customer would pay under the collapse rate compared to what they pay under the tier 1 rate. We've used 2021 volumes for the customers and applied these rates and compared what they would pay. And what we see is that on the left side, we have a table. In the first column, it shows annual savings, which would be a negative number, or cost, which would be a positive number. And then in the second column, it shows the number of accounts that would experience that savings or cost range. So you can see one customer, if we collapse the tiers, would save $8,000 a year. Another customer would save $6,000, and a handful would save in the thousands. And then the largest majority of the customers would actually experience an increase in their bill. You know, you've got 1,558 customers that would pay between $0 and $25 more. Another 1,500 that would pay between $25 and $50 more, etc. The number of accounts in 2021 was 7,735. That's larger than the number of residential customers we have, because some customers have multiple accounts. And the chart to the right is just a graphical depiction of that table. And you can, and I wanted to put the table because you can't really see what's going on at the very far end, because you can't see one account when there are 1,800 customers paying, you know, $75 more. So this is the impact on customer bills that I believe Wendy and some of the other board members were looking for back when we discussed this in November. And we wanted to make sure the board had this information available in the event, you know, that they wanted to change their mind and not wait till the new year to consider this topic, along with other rate topics. That's the end of my presentation.
And Laura, with this table on the left, where do the tiers kick in? So what customer do we see a zero change? What's the monthly consumption? Like, because the tiers change this. So if we flatten them, everyone who's only getting tier 1 is going to see an increase. So I assume those are the customers below 0. The customers reaching tier 3, those are the ones that, you know, what I'm hearing from customers, and I've got a handful of these complaints where people add an EV, add a heat pump, and then they see they're getting this tier 3 charge on their bill, and they feel duped by the fact that they are moving to electricity and they're seeing a higher per kilowatt hour charge. Now, you stated at the beginning that you could view this as less expensive than oil or other heating fuels. But we're getting those complaints where people feel that they are getting charged something additional for doing what the light plan is requesting. So that's why I've asked for this to be on the agenda to talk about this, because time of use implementation is 2024 at the earliest, and the light plant has a tendency to miss timelines. So it could be 2025 and 2 more years of tiered rates. I want to make sure that we address these customers and their complaints that we're receiving.
I don't think that we're looking at the delay of the rollout of time of use until 2025. I don't want to leave the board with that impression. In fact, the board has stated on a number of occasions that they really are anxious to do an earlier pilot with TOU on an opt-in basis where customers could choose. And those who have adopted heat pumps, for example, could maybe be among those early adopters, which means as soon as they got their new meter, right, we could start charging them a time of use rate. So that could be in 2023. Yet if the meters come in April and we're able to start installing them, it depends obviously on the rollout of the installation. If that particular customer who has heat pumps and want to opt in is not on the early end of the installation list, they could be later in 23, et cetera. There's, some complexities involved with that, but I don't feel like saying it's not going to happen until 2025 is probably accurate.
Any other, what is the thoughts of the board on this? Does anyone want to share their thoughts? Pam, Warren, Alice?
I guess I'm a little confused. I'm not quite sure what you're soliciting information on. I think this presentation was very helpful. I can
Yep.
see where the impacts are in the rate structure. I would volunteer as soon as I have my new meter to go on a time of use rate to try it out.
Warren?
Yeah, this is very useful information. I do think it's a hard decision to know how to proceed. Especially because it's talking about a relatively small number of customers who would get a very large financial benefit versus a much larger number of customers who would see their rates go up. And what we don't completely know, among those folks who would see the financial savings, what share of them are the folks who've been doing what the light plant is encouraging them to do, which is to electrify and add heat pumps and add electric vehicles, and what share of those customers are folks who just are not very good about conserving energy and just use a lot and don't have heat pumps and they don't have electric vehicles. So there's a little uncertainty there. So what I'm saying is I remain uncertain about how to proceed, and for that reason I would tend to want to defer doing anything about this.
So, and Pam, your
I
thought.
just wanted to say that I think I would tend to defer to in this situation, and I think Warren makes the kinds of points actually I was which I could articulate as well as he did about, what are we really talking about here with respect to the numbers of people who are doing whatever they can and are seeing a big hit on their rates because they're using an electric vehicle. But not knowing that, and in light of the kinds of reasons that Laura gave and the kind of the concerns about confusing, the public and having to articulate these things, I'm inclined to say we should just stay with what we've got. I assume that with respect to tiers, the demand is fairly inelastic. I always assume, because the people do not really respond. Time use may change that, I would imagine, and I hope, but I gather that these tiers are not functioning too much to do anything with respect to behavioral change. Am I right about that, Dave and Laura?
Yeah,
We've talked about it in previous meetings and we haven't seen change.
and just in terms of volume, for heat pumps, we have about 365 heat pump customers now. And we know we're over 600 EVs in town. We haven't done a final number on that, on the EVs yet, but you know, in 2022, we had 186 heat pump adoptions. So it's moving along quite nicely, but those are the numbers.
All right.
And can you tell what kind of a financial hit that these
Well-
people suffered, or does that, we don't know that, or?
We'd have to look at each account and see where they are. So I couldn't answer that today without really
Sure.
digging into it.
So the reason that I asked for this to be in the agenda was that there was a request for more analysis. That's been provided. I'm getting the sense from the board that they want to wait until time of use comes out to address the tiered structure. And so I feel I'm an outlier on this, and I'll accept that. And we won't. I'm not going to request that the light plant go back and do more analysis on this topic, because I think our time is better spent on other efforts. So does the board agree that we can wait for time of use on the discussion about tiers, so that if I get complaint letters, I can just say we're going to address it when we get to time of use, which is 2024?
I mean, I'm certainly there, and I think we can explain, thanks to what Laura provided and the conversation here, we can explain that, you know, this is, you know, these are the reasons.
Okay. All right. Any other, I see Pam has her hand up. Any other comments from the board before I move on to Pamela? Seeing none, Pamela Dritt.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. Is it possible, without really messing up the administration of it, to give a special rate of allowing those who have done the heat pumps and the electric cars, who are seeing a problem with this, the ones that complained, to allow them to opt in to the higher flat rate without changing it for everybody? Because if it came to a choice between switching, getting rid of the tiered rate system now for everybody, I would be against that too. But I am strongly in favor of not putting financial disincentives to the very electrification that we need as a town. And so couldn't we?
That's a good summary of the question, the balance that we're dealing with is, are we going to flatten it and raise it for most customers, or are we going to find a way to help those going with electric? The problem is there are a handful of customers that are residential R1 customers that are very high consumption and may not be doing any of those electrification efforts. And
We can ignore them, leave them where it is.
well, so I think we'll consider it, but I think it's best if we spend our time on time of use and look forward with this board's time. So
Don't forget, Brian, we already have a special rate for heat pump adopters.
yeah, but
There's a separate meter, but it allows you to receive the lowest tier rate for all your heat pump usage in the winter.
so one of the complaint letters, I explained that to them, and they were balancing the 2023 promise or 2024 promise versus the expense of installing the meter socket and having an electrician come and do that. And they didn't know if it was going to be worth it. If it was 2025 or 30, the time of use was coming, the socket would totally make sense with that heat pump rate. But it's calling the electrician back was kept them from joining that R7 rate. The next, I'm going to close up before I go to public comments, saying that I'm hoping to set up the next, I will do public comments. So I'm hoping that the next meeting that we have is going to be focused on time of use and rate development and rate philosophy for that meeting, excuse me, for that meeting, so that we can really make some progress on that topic. And then we'll, our first meeting in February, we'll do the normal updates and so forth. It just says DB. Oh,
Hi,
Dean.
Dean Banfield. So I'm interested in a little more detail regarding the $13 million warrant article to fund the solar arrays and the batteries. There's been discussion that this is driven by information from SDA. I'd like the light plant to just make that information, the detailed drawings, specifications, estimates, planning materials, just please make them public on the website somewhere so that citizens can see what is 13 million is a big number. And to just say, well, it's for batteries and solar and it's driven by this stuff, it is just too general. And we'd like to see how and pick around on it so we understand it. And people who care about detail want to just understand, how does it break out? How much is it for the rooftop? How much is it for the canopies? How much is it for the batteries, et cetera? So if we can get access to the detailed information, and please make it public on the website, that will help inform the public of what they're going to be voting on when you're asking for $13 million. It's a big number, and we just want to know what's in there. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dean. Mark.
Good morning. So I wanted to pick up a little bit on the discussion that you were having about the public meetings, and specifically the two topic areas that you mentioned, the middle school solar as well as the nuclear component of the power portfolio, and point out that the value of where you're headed is to enhance the collaborative process that we need to see around town. There are other groups, constituency groups, that are involved in both the middle school project, which is in some ways a little bit more straightforward and also immediate, that have perspectives on the goals. The nuclear in the portfolio was part of Article 51. That was also part of the comprehensive sustainable energy plan. And you kind of are at this stage have accomplished something and need to have more of that bilateral discussion with groups like CSEC and the Climate Action Board. And that might even be a precursor to having a public session, and recognize that at a public forum like that, which is focused on, how are we solving the energy portfolio needs of the community, and what are those trade-offs? There are other groups that are also working on that, and it's an opportunity to break down some of the silos. Those of us that come to the light board every month and are sort of steeped in light plant operations have one set of perspectives on it, but the slightly different group of people who might show up to talk about sustainability have a different perspective. And so I would encourage you to think about it in terms of an opportunity to share perspective and learn, and then take a position later on that. I would also note that there are some opportunities to kind of foster how that might go. I noticed that the light board's typically not represented at the monthly chairs breakfast that happens on Wednesday morning, which is when the chairs of various committees actually talk about what their committees are up to and how they're pushing forward. And I think we need to see a little bit more of that, because interest areas in the community tend to get a little bit siloed. And the opportunity here is to hear from each other about what the goals are. And to that end, it might also make sense to try to do something more bilateral. For example, CSEC and the light board meeting together to talk about the power portfolio. There's a great story to be told here, The power portfolio has been green. They should understand that. But, you know, and that those of us that remember how that all came about, we know that to some extent the answer was, well, the light plant can handle a certain amount of the town's emissions portfolio, but then after that, somebody else has got it. You know, once that's done, and you're early. It's been accomplished. It's been great, but it may be somebody else's turn, and then you've got a second order question.
Yeah,
So those are just my couple of comments on, you know, trying to work that as a collaborative thing as well as education. And yes, have pre-discussion so you're prepared, but go in with an open mind, because, you know, these kinds of forms, it's not a good idea to show up with, we already know what the answer is. We just want to convince you. Thank you so much.
yeah, to follow up on a couple of your comments. I apologize for not always being at those breakfasts. I was not on the distribution list for a while, and that recently was updated. The other thing I want to mention is, in establishing how the light plant approaches decarbonizing the portfolio, on December 16th, 2020, there was a collaborative meeting with CAB and the light plant about the portfolio and the plan. So hopefully this meeting will put that on display at how successful that collaboration was in decarbonizing and meeting the Article 51 target.
Yeah, likewise, the middle school solar is, you know, potentially part of the effort that I know Dean was leading around Article 38 last year, and what are we doing about in-town solar, and sort of framing it in terms of those broader issues is really a useful approach to take on each of these. And I also wanted to thank you all. I know it's a burden to take on an extra meeting, but having the time to dig into this. I guess my last quick comment on the tiered rates. The time of use and getting that right is going to be a pretty heavy lift. It's going to take a lot to understand that. There's a lot of factors that are going to weigh into what's going to happen in there. So I'd encourage you also to maybe not get distracted with, and not distract the public with changes to the tiered rates, which, you know, not perfect, but it's the devil we know. And go ahead and really start working on the time of use rates and what's that going to look like, and the education on that going forward.
All right, thank you. David Allen.
Good morning. Let me introduce it this way. Already been mentioned of the severe weather we had in December and problems that the light plant had to deal with, both for electricity and for broadband. It becomes easy when you live in town to take for granted a response. One more time, I think we need to take just a moment here and appreciate how really fine, how extraordinary was that response. I know, among other things, over here where we live, there was a crew, I don't know exactly who was on it, that doesn't matter, up until midnight and past in utterly frigid weather, splicing and so forth. And for goodness sake, it was back up at, relatively speaking, a flash. If this had been an IOU, it would have been next week, next month. Really, not just thanks so much, very much thanks so much, but we need to appreciate and recognize the stellar quality we have in our light plant and in broadband. Thank you from me and from our community.
Great, thank you, David. Mary.
Thanks, Brian. I would just want to say that I'm glad to hear that you're having the public hearing about the middle school solar in February. And the reason is the select board voted the other night to sequence the articles for town meeting. And as you know, enterprise fund budgets and articles sometimes are at the end of the meeting and get very little attention. We've reordered it so that the middle school solar will be earlier in the meeting, and it'll be bundled with other discussions around budgets for the school. So I expect it to get a lot more scrutiny and conversation. So getting ahead of that in February, I think is a great idea. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Jerry?
Hi, thanks, Brian. Jerry Frankel, 132 Cheney Dugan Road. First, I just want to echo the comments about the operational excellence of CMLP. This occurs time and time again, and I'm another resident who really appreciates that. But my main comment here is regarding the Warren article. I think as Dean Banfield pointed out, the number of $13 million will hit people pretty darn hard. But missing from the description, at least as I see it, is there's very little, actually no discussion of operational savings through avoided costs. In other words, building out the PV at CMS will save the town money operationally due to avoiding the need to buy energy externally. And I'd like to see that financial analysis added to future discussions of this warrant article. Thank you.
Great. Pamela?
Thank you. 3 really quick things. 1, thank you all for all of the hard work and so on. We really do appreciate it. Can you please put the packet online so that we can access it without my having to pester Brian to send it to me later by email? 2, can we do we have as the light plant the goal of incentivizing, we clearly have the goal of incentivizing the reduction of fossil fuel use and the increase of electric use. But do we not also have the goal of increasing the residential power production locally through residential solar and battery, as well as town solar and battery, so that we can become a power plant and produce a lot of our own energy here without having to buy it and without having to pay the distribution costs?
Right. Thank you. Do you have any additional comments?
Third, we need to recognize that the school isn't going to spend education money electrifying the bus fleet as much. We need to spend that as a town for the general benefits and cost savings of electrification of the school bus fleet, their use as battery backups, mobile battery backups, and the savings in the health of the kids. Can we do that?
Thank you, Pamela. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'd like to ask if someone would like to make a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
I second.
Second,
All right, Warren,
yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thanks.